Hello, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Justin Sloan.
And I'm Paul Zeidman, and I'm very happy to introduce our even his bio even calls him one of the most versatile writers of the modern era, Antony Johnston. Thank you Johnston, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. And yes, don't worry, everybody pronounces my name wrong. Everybody spells it wrong as well. I'm very, very used to it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. Antony and I actually worked on a project together. We were both on the Silent Hill Ascension project with DJ2 Entertainment. And I call it project because it's not really a game, it's not really a TV show. It's one of those fun things that you'll find out soon enough. I think it's coming out. Did they say 2024 now, Antony? Do you know? Are you aware?
I haven't heard that, but you might be right. Yeah, you were with DJ2. I was working on behalf of Bad Robot.
Right.
Yeah, and
that's
it
right.
was there were a whole bunch of different companies and partners involved in that project.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought it was still supposed to be coming out later this year, but I haven't heard anything specific.
Yeah, so don't take our word on it, people. But anyway, it's coming out soon.
Definitely do not take our word for it. I haven't been involved in that project since February, and I think
I was around that time, right before you, a couple months before you, maybe even. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. End of last year, didn't you? Yeah. So
short little 5 or 6 month stint on my side, maybe even 4. But anyway, yeah, so that was an awesome experience. I got to see firsthand that Antony is great in the room, a nice person, and shortly after watched his video. I think it was after, right? The video for GDC where you talk about leading a writer's room for games, and that's a great talk. If you haven't checked it out, people, do so. I'll try to put it in the show notes. But before we dive into all the fun that is Antony, let's talk about what we've read and listened to lately. And I'll just throw out there real quick. I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. It's a sci-fi book that gets a thumbs up by Antony, apparently. And I enjoyed it. It's very great, especially great on the character side, on like thinking of diversity and all that, inclusion and whatnot, and asking questions and analyzing AI and what is it, and what does the future hold if we are in space with different kinds of species and whatnot. So very fun book. And I also read Starship Troopers, which is not at all what people who've seen the movie think it is. So quite a fun read in that regard too, just to see like, oh, how the hell did they go from this book to that movie? That doesn't make sense at all. So yeah, 2 fun reads.
Excellent.
Paul,
Excellent.
what you got?
Yeah, they're just about to I think this weekend is the last time they'll be sending out Netflix DVDs, so I got my second to last one. It is a movie, I believe it's either from late last year or early this year, called Violent Night, and I guess the best way to describe it is if you combine Home Alone and Die Hard. So
that's the one with David Harbour, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty much bad guys take over a rich lady's house, yes. And Santa just happens to be there, and he goes all hardcore action hero on him, and it's very cartoonish and very over the top with the violence, and some of it's very silly, and it's there's so many obvious tugs on the heartstrings. But yeah, it's a fun, silly movie. I don't think it's going to become a Christmas holiday classic, but for what it was good, and some surprisingly good acting from David Harbour, and I had no idea John Leguizamo was going to be in it, and Beverly D'Angelo, and I just thought, wow, they got an impressive cast for this. Yeah, but it was fun. It was fun, silly fun. I think it's probably the best way to describe it. Indeed. Antony, how about you?
Did you find? Yeah.
Well, so funnily enough, just a quick digression. The reason I gave a thumbs up to Becky Chambers is because I read all of the Wayfarers series and I love them. They're some of my favorite recent sci-fi. So if you liked that, you should read the rest of the series. They're absolutely brilliant. But I also specifically touted The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet as an influence on my latest book.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason that came to mind now is because the book a book I read recently that I'll talk about is called The Three Dahlias by Katie Watson. It's a cozy crime book. And that's what my latest one is. That's why it came to mind. And it's an excellent, the premise is great. It's 3 actresses, each of whom have played the same fictional detective on screen at different times. So you have an elderly woman who played her in film versions in the 1950s. You have a middle-aged woman who played her in TV versions in the 1970s, and then a young, actually probably you can shift those forward a decade or two, and then you have a young woman who is playing her now in a new film version, and they're at a country estate to film this new version. And of course, somebody gets murdered, and the three women who play the fictional detective all team up together to solve the crime as real detectives. It's great. It's really well written. I love that premise. It's really well written. It twists and turns, and sort of keeps you guessing. It's one of my favorite reads of recent months for sure.
Excellent.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah. So Antony, let's talk a little bit about you before we get to all of your very diverse catalog of material. So, were you the kind of writer that you've been writing as long as you can remember, or is your story more of a you were never much of a writer, then you decided, hey, I've got this story in my head, I just have to put on paper, and you decided to give it a try, like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this, I think I'll do more of it?
I'd say it was kind of both in a way. Like I've always told stories as far back as I can remember. I always enjoyed telling stories. I've always done it one way or another, whether that's scribbling on a cartoons in an exercise book as I was as a child, or typing up short stories on my kitchen table when I was a teenager. I've always done that. But I did kind of take a break from it because in my 20s, I went to art college and I became a graphic designer. And I spent about 10 years working in design agencies, pre-press bureaus, and publishers designing magazines. That was what I eventually kind of specialized in towards the end of that career. And while I was doing that, I was very focused on that because I enjoyed it. It was it's something I still kind of do a little bit of it now, keep my hand in. So I really enjoyed doing it, and I was very focused on it. So I didn't, the writing kind of, fell by the wayside a bit. But then I discovered the internet. The web came about while I was in the early part of that career. And I was on Usenet, if anybody remembers that back in the day. And I joined a cyberpunk fiction writing group on Usenet. And that kind of started me writing short fiction again. And I kept that up. And then eventually that turned into me, because I would always read comics as well. I grew up reading comics as well as books and watching movies and stuff, obviously. And I eventually sort of shifted, if you like, to focusing on comics and graphic novels in the late 90s. And that was actually the first, say 10, 15 years of my writing career was almost exclusively comics and graphic novels. And then video games came along a bit later. But yeah, so it was kind of both. As I say, I've always done it, but I did take a break. And then when I came back to it, I was like, actually, no, I remember now why I used to do this as a kid, because I really enjoyed doing it. And I had a lot to learn. My early work was a bit ropey in places, as it would be with everyone. But I've been doing it for long enough now that, I can't imagine doing anything else. And I genuinely do love it. Every day I sit down at this very desk to work, and I couldn't be happier.
That's fantastic. So there's so many things to touch on with that one. So I was going through your bio, and it said that you the film Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron, that was based on your graphic novel. Now, how similar was the film to the graphic novel? Did they take a lot of liberties? Is it still the basic story with a few tweaks, or was it total night and day difference, or is it that's exactly how I envisioned it?
Well, so that's a funny one. It's not exactly how I envisioned it, but it is actually surprisingly faithful. So the graphic novel was essentially my attempt to write a sort of John le Carré-esque noirish Cold War spy story in graphic novel form, because nobody was really doing that at the time. There were spy stories in comics, but they were generally contemporary, or they were very focused on the high action, James Bond, secret agent style stuff. And I like that just fine. I really do. But I also really like the Len Deighton, John le Carré style, gritty, grey, bleak Cold War stuff. I really do love that. I grew up in Europe during the Cold War. The Cold War was still a thing when I was a kid. So I wanted to bring that into graphic novels. And that's what we did with The Coldest City, as it was originally called, with Oni Press, illustrated by my friend Sam Hart. It was creatively a great success. commercially, perhaps not so much, not the most sort of commercially viable project in the world, but it did what we set out to do, and people loved it. And yeah, it was a really sort of bleak, noirish, black and white art as well, very stark, no grays, pure blacks and whites. And that was a very deliberate, creative choice to get that noir feeling. But you can't do that on film. I mean, you just can't. You can do monochrome, but then you've got grays, and then it just looks old fashioned, and it's a bit, a bit dull. And so the rights have been optioned by Charlize Theron's production company, and they were looking around for a producer, and we looked at a few different people, a few different screenwriters, but then along came Dave Leitch, and actually at the time it was Dave and Chad Stahelski, sort of as a pair, as they did John Wick together. Turned out that scheduling meant that they had to sort of split off and take one project each. But Dave's genius, if you like, was to say, look, we can't replicate this on screen, but what if we went the other way? This is the 80s, set in the 80s. What if we took that 80s aesthetic of like really bright, garish colors and neon and all that, and really intense colors, ramped it up? Could you still make a noir, a really colorful noir? And the answer, of course, is yes. That's exactly what he did. And it was such a great idea. Like I say, that was his, I won't say his, that was his genius, like I say, not his main contribution, because obviously he did a great job directing it. But that was what really sold me on, oh, here's a guy with a vision. Here's a guy who sort of has really thought about this. And so what that means is that tonally, the film is very different to the book. The book has almost no action. It's not high octane. There are no car chases. That fight in the stairwell that everybody remembers from the movie, that is in the book. It lasts for like 4 pages. And there's like maybe 2 punches thrown, It's so tonally, it's very different. But the story, the core story, and the characters, and even some lines of dialogue are taken straight from the book. So like I say, it's a really weird one where on the one hand, it's really faithful. But on the other hand, if you just looked at the book compared to the movie, you'd say, oh, well, this is nothing. These two things are nothing like one another. So yeah, it's an odd one, but I liked it. I was a co-producer on it, so I knew what they were doing. I saw screenplays and gave notes and stuff, even before it was filmed. I spent some time on the set. So yeah, I was very, very happy with the outcome.
That's fantastic. So the question that really popped into my mind, especially as I was going through your bio, that it's like I mentioned at the outset, that it's such a diverse catalog of material. I mean, you have this, as you said, like the noir story of Atomic Blonde, and then like the Dog Sitter Detective, which is like, almost a cozy mystery, and you have spy thrillers with Brigitte Sharp. I mean, so are these just all of these genres appeal to you, and you just think, I've always liked this, I want to try my own version of it? Is that what it was, or did something just kind of just spark in your mind, I'm going to write a cozy mystery?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, yeah, everything that I write is something that I would want to read myself. It always has been. That's my baseline. Even when I'm doing, say, a work for hire book, like a superhero book or something, which obviously there's a bit of sort of editorial guidance goes on there, but still I always write a book or a comic that I would want to read. If I don't achieve that, then as far as I'm concerned, I've failed. So they are all things that appeal to me. They're all genres that appeal to me. I like quite a diverse range of topics and books, movies, and what have you myself. And that includes cozy. I'd always read cozy. I've always watched cozy TV shows. Midsummer Murders, which I know people in the US are familiar with. Murder, She Wrote, obviously being the canonical example in the US. I've always enjoyed those shows and read cozy books, Miss Marple, that sort of thing, but I just never had a go at writing one. And honestly, I didn't intend to until what happened was lockdown. And during lockdown, I was actually supposed to be writing that book there. You can just see it there, the Patrios Network, the third Brigitte Sharp thriller. I was supposed to be writing that, but spy thrillers rely on things like, foreign travel and geopolitics and the state of the world and all that sort of thing. And in the initial COVID lockdown, none of us had any idea what the world was going to look like in 6 months' time, let alone a year's time. You know, there was serious talk about whether half the airlines in the world might go out of business. So it made writing that book really, really difficult. Plus, obviously, everybody was feeling very down. That was quite a bleak period for the world. And so I thought, well, I can't write that, but I have to write something. Like I say, I've been doing this for so long now, I don't really know how to do anything else anymore. I've got to write something. And so I just thought, oh, hang on, what if I write something that will make me smile and laugh while I'm writing it? And to do that, I thought, well, the obvious answer there is a cozy mystery. And so that was the initial spark, in fact. And I wasn't even thinking about publication at the time. I really just wrote it to kind of cheer myself up. But then about halfway through, I started thinking, actually, this isn't bad. Like, I think there might be something here. And so when I had a rough draft, and it was very rough, I sent it to some friends, other, crime and mystery writer friends, and some friends who are readers who read a lot of crime and mystery stuff, and said, is there anything here? Do you think this is, any good? And thankfully, they all came back and said, yes, needs a lot of work, which it did. But yeah, there's something here. And so, yeah, a couple of years later, The Dog Sitter Detective hit the shelves, and second book's coming out in January. And I'm just talking to the publisher at the moment about a contract for books 3 and 4. So
that's fantastic.
Whoever could have predicted that?
Exactly. So I do have one question about the cozy mysteries, and then I'll toss it over to Justin. So when you're writing it, I mean, it's easy to fall into the tropes of the story. That do you ever try to find yourself with the mindset of, okay, how can I do this in a way that is what I'm trying to think about, that is appropriate for the genre, but also something maybe like people haven't seen before? Like, do you want to surprise them? Like, hey, this thing that you're so used to seeing it done this way, here's a totally new way to see it. Is that kind of like how your mindset works while you're writing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I don't always do it. It depends. What I try to do is, yes, subvert those tropes a little bit and do something unexpected, but that will hit the same emotional satisfaction for the reader as the trope they're expecting. That to me, I think, is the key to, especially with a cozy book, to being successful in that, yes, obviously you don't want to be cliched. You want people to be surprised. You want people to go, oh, I didn't expect that. But you don't want that surprise and that unexpectedness to turn them off the book. You don't want them to say, and therefore I don't like this anymore. So yeah, I always try to hit that, as I say, the same kind of emotional beat that people are expecting and want. And I want myself, when I'm reading a book like that, I want those emotional beats, and I want that same sort of journey, if you like, through the book. But yeah, doing it in, as you say, specifically different ways to what people might expect. That's always what I try to do. People can judge for themselves whether I succeed, but yeah, it's always on my mind for sure.
Of course. Well, okay. Well, I've covered a lot of the book aspect, and I know, and Justin's really the video game guy. So I think that I have a feeling that's where we're going to go with this one. So I'm going to throw it over to him now.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely have some questions about video games and some other topics, but I wanted to real quick ask about brand. So looking at yourself, do you feel like that you have a brand that, like, if somebody's like, who are you? What do you write? Like, your one thing that you throw out there? Or do you kind of have to say, hey, I write all over the place? What's your kind of thought on your own brand right now?
I do kind of generally just say, yeah, I'm all over the place. I mean, it depends. It depends what the medium and format is, which itself is kind of an answer to, yeah, I'm all over the place. But if it's in games, like, realistically, I am known as a horror guy in games. And that's kind of, I don't fight against it necessarily. I don't seek it. It's just that some of the biggest titles I've worked on have been horror franchises. And so I get approached a lot to do more horror franchises. So yeah, in games, I often, if I'm introducing myself to, executives or something, or at a social gathering, I will often lead with, things like Dead Space and Resident Evil, because that's what people expect from me. But yeah, if it's comics, then I will lead with things like Atomic Blonde or Wasteland, which is a post-apocalyptic epic series that I did. If it's books, these days I lead with The Dog Sitter Detective, but 3 years ago I would have led with the Brigitte Sharp thrillers. It's
Yeah.
so yeah, it is. I just kind of I've had to accept that the way my creative mind works is I get an idea and I want to do it.
Yeah.
And I kind of don't care what genre it is, or whether it's what people expect of me, or what my publisher or agent might expect of me. You know, if I get a bee in my bonnet and I want to do a creative project, then I will do it. I mean, I'm a musician as well. I put out electronic ambient albums on Bandcamp. You know, it's just like I say, I'm kind of broadly creative, and I probably could have been more commercially successful if I'd focused on a single thing. You know, if I'd said at the start of my career, because my first novel actually was a horror novel. It was a contemporary horror thriller set in London. And it won an award at an independent publisher award at Book Expo America the year it was released. So if I'd focused on that, if I'd taken that and gone, okay, that's it, I'm the horror guy, and spent the last 20 years doing nothing but being the horror guy, maybe I could have had more commercial success, you know. But I also think I would have been bored. And that's part of the issue for me, is I like doing lots of different things because it keeps me interested in what I'm doing. Plus, you know, I have a lot of ideas and life is short.
Yeah, commercial success at the expense of mental stability. Yeah. So what if you were talking to a new writer, somebody listening right now, and then at the same table, there's a mid-level writer. Do you think your advice on brand and going this route in life, do you think it would change based off if you're talking to a new writer? Like, should they focus on brand? And like, or a mid-level writer who's kind of not your, let's say my level, like, should I focus on brand? I already have thoughts in my head, but you know, if you're giving that advice to some people, what would be your thoughts on that?
It's really difficult because it depends on everybody's individual situation. Like, brand is important, no question. You know, and I think I do have a brand, but my brand is me, and it's just kind of quality. You know, my promise, if you like, is to my readers, look, I may not do what you expect me to do, but I promise you that it will be of a high quality. You know, that's maybe not much of a brand, but it is what I've got. I certainly wouldn't discourage younger writers from building a brand because it can be very successful. But, and this is the years of experience talking, on the flip side, you've got to be able to sleep at night. And you've got to keep yourself interested. If this is going to be a career, if you're going to do this for 20 years, you have got to make sure that in 20 years' time, you will still be interested in whatever it is that you sit down to write every day. And if you're not, that's when burnout happens. That's when you start to fade. Readers can tell that you're not actually enthused about what you're writing. I can, you know, I'm sure as a reader myself, I can always tell when an author is not actually much into what they're doing. So you've got to balance those two things. Now, for me, the balance has kind of come down on the side of, well, do whatever inspires you and to hell with the commercial prospects. You know, I wouldn't necessarily advise that to everyone. You know, like I say, if you can, try to strike a better balance. But at the same time, yeah, you know, mental health is important. We've all learned that over the last 10, 20, 30 years. You know, it really is. And if you're not going to burn out, then you've got to take care of your brain as well as your body.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I read a bunch of randomness all over the place, but I also feel like I have a brand. So good advice. So focusing on those games, Dead Space, Shadow of Mordor, Resident Evil Village, and of course the experience, or the whatever they call it, Silent Hill Ascension.
The interactive web series is what I was told to say. Yeah, that's how I was told to describe it.
Cool. Yeah. So some really great titles there, even ignoring the fact that they're horror, but you know, that's great for the brand side of it. But just big titles. Shadow of Mordor, one of my favorite games. Love that. Dead Space, of course, they just came out with the, what do you call it? The revamping of it, and it's amazing.
The remake. Yeah.
Yeah, the remake. So good stuff on this. So I wanted to ask specifically, like, how did you get such a great track record on all this? Was it kind of what you were saying before? Is it like you're doing the comics and things happen and the right people call you or have these conversations and it just happens? Or did you at one point say, I want to do some games, I kind of want to do these ones? Was there any focused trajectory into your path?
I wish. I wish there had been a focused trajectory. Oh my goodness. No, I kind of fell backwards into games. So here's the thing. I've always played games. Like, I'm old enough to remember Space Invaders, the original coin op Space Invaders in the local takeout. You know, it's like, so I have grown up with video games. I've always played them. I've always loved them. And ever since playing things like Loom, the LucasArts adventure, if you remember that from the 1990s, and the original Silent Hill games, those things, games like that always made me want to write games. You know, they inspired me, and I was like, yeah, I would really love to do this. But I had no idea how to get into the industry. None whatsoever. And back then, you couldn't do courses in writing video games. I don't think you could even do courses in designing video games in the late 90s. Formal, sort of university and college courses, I mean. And what happened was I got a call, I got recommended actually to write the Dead Space tie-in comic before the game came out. So this is kind of going back a few years. A lot of people don't remember or don't realize now that it used to be the case that tie-in comics to video games would come out after the game was released. So they would be a marketing thing. The game would come out, the game would be a hit or whatever, and then the marketing department would go, hey, why don't we license a comic and sort of make a comic series of this? And it would come out like 12 months, 18 months, 2 years after the video game had. The innovation with Dead Space, what they called their what did they call it? I think they called it like 3 media or something, media cubed. Obviously that became known as transmedia, which is still not great, but much better than media cubed. The idea of that was, no, we're going to do all of this at the same time. And that's why you had the comic and the anime and the ARG website and the game all released at the same time, or in the run-up to the game's release, at any rate, to support its promotion. And so that meant that I started work on the comic in 2006, 2 years before the game was released. And so I was, even though I wasn't involved at that time in making the game, I was privy to all those conversations. I was on a lot of those calls. I was privy to email chains and what have you. This was before Slack. So it was because I had to be, because I was writing a prequel. So I had to have all that knowledge. I had to know what was going on with the game so that I could write, do a lot of world building for the prequel. And they liked my work on the comic enough. I think it was after I'd turned in the script for issue 2 that they said, we really like what you're doing here, because I was doing a lot of original stuff, stuff that isn't in the game at all, that set on the planet. Would you like to try out for writing the game? And I bit their hand off and then said, yes, please. And I tried out and I got the gig, and that was my first video game. And I mean, how could you plan for something like Dead Space to be your first video game? You can't, right. It's impossible. But then it was up to me to go, okay, do I want to do this again? Do I want this to be another strand of my career? Because at the time I was pretty much full-time on comics and graphic novels. And I said, yes, I decided I did. And that's when I wrote Dead Space Extraction, which was the Wii light gun game. I wrote another Dead Space graphic novel. I did some preliminary work on both Dead Space 2 and 3. Very little, not a huge amount. I don't think I'm even credited on Dead Space 2. It was so little work, but I did a little work on those, and then started getting offered, because of the success of Dead Space, started getting offered gigs on other games. And I just I grabbed that strand of my career with both hands, if you like, and said, yeah, what the hell? Let's do this and have a multi-strand career. Why not? Let's be a hyphenate in a sense. Nice. And so games just became this huge part of my career ever since. I'm still doing it. Like literally today, before speaking to you, I'm working on a game called Altered Alma, which will be coming out next year. And that's what it's a Metroidvania, cyberpunk Metroidvania with a romance system. Very, very unusual mishmash there. And yeah, that's what I was working on today. That's, a large part of my working life these days is still games, and has been ever since. Yeah. What would that be? That's 17 years now. Good Lord.
Yeah. You must have been in the higher up / leadership / hiring side of this at some points, or helping out, at least in some degree, right? So the question there being, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong, but is there anything you notice about other writers that make them stand out in the crowd, or people who are trying to get, like, so many people are getting laid off right now, and like it's a crazy industry. Like, what can people do to stand out, in your opinion, from what you've seen in these writing rooms or with other writers in video games, to get the job or to excel once they do get the job?
It's really hard right now. Yeah, I know a lot of people, as you say, have been laid off. A lot of people are really struggling to find work, which is crazy because it seems like there are more games projects happening than ever before. So why is everybody fighting? I don't really understand. I mean, I've never been staff in a studio, and I've never been sort of management level, but I have been in a position to hire writers and to decide who gets a gig or who doesn't, to go in a writer's room, that sort of thing. What I look for, if it's a job where there are going to be multiple writers working in a room, as we did on Silent Hill Ascension, and that is, obviously if you're hiring several writers, that's normally going to be the case these days. What I look for is not only somebody's quality of work, because obviously, you're in a place where most people's work is of a certain baseline quality. So you want good work. Obviously, if you find somebody with exceptional work, then that's a massive plus. But you're also looking, or I anyway, I'm looking for somebody's personality and their ability and experience with collaborating with other writers. Prior experience in a games room or in a TV room is a really big bonus. And that's the sort of thing that you can kind of make yourself. So when people say to me, how do I get a job in games these days? You can't do what I did. I wish you could, but you can't. So the advice I always give is make a game. Make a no-budget game with your friends or with people you meet online who also want to make a game. Assemble a small team, make a tiny, tiny little zero-budget game, and use that as your calling card to then get a gig, maybe get some minor funding to make a smaller, a slightly bigger game, but still small, and then use that as your next calling card, and so on, and just sort of move up the ladder like that. And you can build a writer's room with that sort of project, as long as everybody understands, hey, we're doing this for our resumes. Nobody's going to make a lot of money from this, and in fact, we may even lose money, but we're doing it for our resumes and to build that experience. You can do that. Get 3 writers together, get 4 writers, work on something together, collaborate, get that experience of bouncing ideas off one another. You saw this in the Silent Hill Ascension room. A huge part of it is just bouncing ideas off of other writers, being open to collaboration, not being precious about your own ideas, building on other people's ideas, taking their inspiration and saying, okay, plussing, as they say. Do they still say that? I don't know. In the industry, they used to. Taking somebody's idea and saying, that's great, and now what if we built on that and did this as well? Or shooting down an idea and saying, yeah, I don't think that's going to work, but what if we did it this way instead? Having that sort of collaborative skill, and it is a skill that can be developed, and building that skill, developing that skill, I think is essential these days to working in games, because so many games have writers' rooms and have multi-person narrative teams. And I advocate for that, to be fair. I want games that employ more than one writer. I think that's an important part of games development going forward. And an important part of being in those rooms is having that collaborative skill. And also, yes, being a good writer. Being able to fall back on skills that you developed in other media, I think, are really important. Obviously, I've done this myself. I have a lot of experience in media outside of games. Most of the really great game writers I know also do something else outside of games, whether that's writing novels or even, or just short stories, whether it's writing comics, whether it's songwriting even. They have some kind of creative thing they do outside of games where they are creating things from whole cloth, because that's what writers do. We are the first people there. We are the ones who create something from nothing. And if you have a hobby or another strand to your career where you're doing that isn't games, I genuinely think that helps you be a better games writer, because it gives you a broader experience and makes you a more well-rounded writer. So that's something to look at as well. But yeah, mostly it is that collaborative skill. I think it's so important. And it's when I have been looking for people to fill rooms, it's one of the first hurdles that a lot of people fall down on. They just don't have experience of working in those rooms. So, I mean, I always try to, if I'm in a position to, I always try to find somebody who hasn't worked in a room before and bring them in so that they get that experience. But obviously you can't always do that. It depends on the project. So yeah, get that experience and that will really help you.
Great. I'll throw back to Paul after one more brief question, hopefully. Let's see. I won't go into all the details of your speech. Just again, it's awesome. It's available on YouTube right now. You can search GTC and Antony Johnston and watch that. It's great. But I just wanted to ask on that note, so that one's all about like how to lead a writer's room. Do you have any thoughts on when you're ready to lead a writer's room? Like if somebody's like talking to somebody, they're like, yeah, would you rather be a writer right now, or would you rather be like this narrative design lead who's leading the room and all that? How do you know when you're ready, or what can you do to get ready?
That's a really good question and a really tricky one. So the first time I ever led a room, I didn't think I was ready, but I was asked to do it by a studio who I'd worked with before, and they said, they clearly thought I was, because they said, would you lead this team? Would you build a team and then lead it? And I had that moment of like, I've never done this before. I'm not sure. Oh, I don't know. Can I do this? But then I thought, well, they clearly believe that I can. They clearly have that faith in me, and they're the ones paying the bills. So I said, yeah, what the hell? And that's not to say that I went into it half-cocked. You know, I did a lot of reading and a lot of listening to sort of podcasts and stuff from people who've led rooms to get best practices and advice. And I'd been doing that to an extent anyway, you know, sort of all throughout my career. I've always learned from more experienced writers. I've never stopped learning. I always go to lectures and workshops and seminars from writers to learn new things. And part of that is, listening to like TV writers or animation writers talk about that collaborative process. So it's not like I went into it completely cold, but nevertheless, I did put a lot of work in to make sure that I was prepared. And I think that's all you can do, really. I think that it's people say that nobody is ever ready to be a parent. Like, no matter when you discover that you're going to be a parent, nobody ever thinks, sure, yeah, I'm ready for this. That never happens. Never. And I
if
think
they do think they are, they're probably not. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of similar with leading a team of any kind, not just leading a writer's room, but being a leader of any kind. I don't think anybody ever truly thinks they're ready for it. But you have to kind of think, well, hang on, do other people think I'm ready for it? And if so, are they right? Is it just my insecurity talking? Because we all have that insecurity, that lack of confidence, the imposter syndrome. It's absolutely real. So you have to put your faith in others a little bit. You know, if they believe that you can do it, then step up to the plate and give it a try. You never know until you try. And then as for how to make a go of it, well, I mean, you've seen the talk, as you know, that's sort of my idea for best practices of how to lead it. But yeah, when people ask you to do these things, my reaction is always to go, well, hell, what have you got to lose? You know, give it a try. Because you might actually discover that you're quite good at it, and that people enjoy working in your rooms. I mean, I'm very, quite proud to be able to say that every room I've run, everybody's told me afterwards, that was a great room. Thank you. You did a good job. And that doesn't mean that I still try to improve and get better every time I do it, of course. But you just never know when you might find something you're good at.
Really cool. And I have like a billion other things. I'm sure we could go on for hours, but Paul, you got anything
me
else
too.
before
So do I. I have one. Well, I'm going to start with the one question I really want to ask, and if there is time, I'll get to the second question. But the first one is that, so we've been talking a lot about your work as a writer, but one of the books that you also produced is called The Organized Writer, which is to help writers be better writers. Yep, there it is, right behind you on your bookshelf. Surprise, surprise. So what was the inspiration for that? And what kind of, not that you have to give a thumbnail description of it, but what sort of advice do you offer to writers? And also, how has the reception been? Because as we know, there are a ton of, here's a how, not a how-to, but here's a helpful guide to being a writer. So, I mean, how has it been received by the writing public?
It's been very well received. So it came about kind of by popular demand, actually. What happened was and I'll try and be very brief here. So what happened was that I went freelance. Like I said, I previously worked in magazines, and I thought, well, surely going freelance will be a doddle compared to all the, because of being the sort of, the senior art director of a magazine, you have to keep a lot of things in your head. You've got charts, and you carry a clipboard with you everywhere, or used to. I'm sure it's all done on the computer now. You had to be very organized. And I thought, well, surely if I'm just being a freelance writer, it'll be a doddle. I just write a few things, send them off, invoice somebody, checks come in, well, no problem. And of course, that wasn't the case. And after a few years, I was severely disorganized, and I'd actually missed a deadline or two, which, coming from the world of magazines, was abhorrent to me. That's like, deadlines are sacrosanct in my world. So I thought, well, I've got to get a hold of this. I've got to take a grip on this and figure this out and solve this problem. And so I did. And I did that by a deep dive into the world of productivity systems, stuff like Getting Things Done by David Allen being the most famous one that people will know of. The problem is that all of those systems are aimed at managers and business executives and people who are on the go all the time and are constantly being interrupted. And of course, that's not a writer's life at all. I sit here at this desk for hours at a time, working on the same thing with no interruptions, or at least trying not to be interrupted. And so a large part of the system is actually about making sure that I am able to write. And basically what happened was I created this system and then wrote a blog post about it, and people loved that blog post. I mean, like, so many people read that blog post and told me they liked it and that it was helpful to them. And then other people started saying, you should expand that into a book. And so I eventually did. And that's The Organised Writer. But it's simply about making sure that when I sit down at this desk to write, I am not distracted, I'm not interrupted, and that I can focus entirely on the writing, on the work. And I do that by making sure that everything that isn't the writing is taken care of and is organized in a way that I won't forget anything, and that I will be reminded of the things I have to do at the appropriate time. And that helps, because then knowing that, having that system, that means I know I've got my trays here, I've got my diary here, I've got, sort of emails on the computer, means that when I come to write, I'm not worried that I've forgotten a task I need to do. I'm not thinking, oh, I must remember to email the editor, or I must remember to do this thing or that thing. I must remember to make those notes. I'm not doing that because I've already done those things outside of the writing time. And so when I come to actually write, I have the confidence of knowing I don't have to think about any of that. I don't need to worry that I'm going to forget something that's not related to writing. I don't have to keep that sort of laundry list of tasks in my head. Instead, I can just write. I can just focus on nothing but being creative. And it sounds so simple, but it is so hard to do. But it's also so powerful. If you can do that, it's so freeing and liberating. Honestly, it's once I started consciously doing that and arranging my day and my work and organizing, even literally organizing the layout of my study here to facilitate that, it changed my life. I became so much more productive. I've never missed a deadline since, and now I regularly have 3 or 4 projects on the go at once without getting falling down because of stress.
Wow, that is amazing. I think that sounds like something every writer would definitely benefit from. And fortunately, it's available in book form, and you can order it just about anywhere, especially on Amazon and Amazon UK for all of our international listeners.
And there's even an audio book which I narrate.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Fantastic. Antony, this has been incredibly fantastic and informative. I got to say, my wife loves cozy mysteries, and she loves Agatha Christie and Poirot. I really think she would like The Dog Sitter Detective. Just I've been looking at it behind you on the bookshelf there the whole time,
It's
and I just keep
cover,
thinking it is. I think she would really like this. Do you narrate that one too?
I do not know. No, no, I don't. I didn't mind narrating nonfiction. I'm not going to try and do it with fiction because I can't do voices. No, it's narrated by a British, well, actually in New Zealand, but sort of lived in and worked in Britain for decades, actress called Nicolette Mackenzie. And she is amazing. She is so good. I cannot even tell you how good she is. It's just, she is absolutely perfect. I really, really hope that we can keep her for future books. I've had people contact me and say, like, I enjoyed the book, but my God, that narrator, she's amazing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because now I'm torn between wanting to get her a hard copy of the book or to get her the audiobook version. So, well, I'll figure something out. It'll come down to it. Antony, again, thank you. This has been such a great time to talk to you. And I love all the stuff you've been talking about, even the video game stuff, which I know is Justin's forte.
Even that. Yeah, the books sound amazing. I'm excited to delve in as well. And thank you again, Antony. It's been great.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I wish we could. I feel like we could keep talking for hours.
Oh, trust me, I have this big list of stuff I wanted to talk about. We only scratched the surface, but maybe we can bring you back for a future installment.
Yeah. Sure, I'd love to come back.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And where can people find you online?
They can find me by spelling my name correctly, essentially. So my name is unusually spelled. It is ANTONY JOHNSTON, and as long as you spell it that way, you will find me. So AntonyJohnston.com is my website. All my social media is at Antony Johnston on the various sites. Yeah, that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Blue Sky, Mastodon, you name it. Because my name is unusually spelled, I can get that handle. So yeah, just find me. And my newsletter is at ajwriter.substack.com, but you can get to that by going to my website, and there's a link there for click the link and subscribe. I only send one out about once every 3 months. It's not a very high traffic newsletter. I've got too many other things to do.
Well, it's because you're so organized.
It's a full-time job. I feel like sometimes this newsletter and marketing stuff. Oh.
Honestly, yeah, it reminds me of the early 90s. That's the funny thing. Like in the early to mid 90s, everybody had newsletters, and then they went away because we got social media.
Yeah. What do you need them for? Exactly. Cool. I think that brings us to a close. Anything else you wanted to shout out? Anything we forgot, Antony?
I don't think so. No. Yeah. Follow me on social media, buy my books, play my video games, have a good time. Yeah, and listeners, if you haven't, leave reviews on all of those as well. Authors especially love reviews on the books. And spreading word of mouth is great. Get that grassroots campaign going. If you haven't played the games, where are you? Get on those, of course. As a gamer, I have to, feel like you're a weirdo if you haven't played those games. But yeah, as also for the show, please leave a review, spread word of mouth. We love all that. Once again, this is the Creative Writing Life Podcast, and I'm Justin Sloan. And I'm Paul Zeidman. You can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z, at maximumz.blog. I'm also on the socials, on Twitter. I'm not calling it that other thing, at maximum_Z, and on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ Screenwriting. And you can check out my books on Amazon as well. Like you said, he's Justin. That's Antony. I've been Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life Podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.